For everyone who's joining us for the first time, for reoccurring visitors, thank you for being here with us. If you are just joining for the first time, we started this, man, it's been almost 3 weeks now. We've been doing seminars. We've made it to our 6th webinar of TM 101. It has grown beyond what we thought it would be from the first one, and it has just been awesome. And we've started having special guests and build ways to interact with students and help you guys understand tour management, the ins and outs of TM 101. We have made it to logistics today. We are joined, sorry, one second. We are joined by Kyle Jones, who is with Special Event Transportation. We are with Shannon with Upstaging. And we have John Aiken with Beat the Street, who are going to discuss logistics, busing, touring, all of the good stuff with us today. Thank you for being here with us.
And guys, we'll just say hello to York from Beat the Street, who's out there looking in the panel.
Hi, York.
Hi, York. Good morning.
Yeah, man.
And to all the
Good
reoccurring
evening.
panelists that have been with us from the start. So we are all here for you guys. So happy to be here. Yeah, it's discussing logistics today.
Hey, can we take a moment real quick to just acknowledge the passing of our friend and colleague in Dubai, Nigel Beaton, who unfortunately was taken far too soon by coronavirus, and he leaves behind his wonderful wife, Karen, who is also one of us and works in production over in Dubai, and they've made many of our lives a complete walk in the park under great circumstances. So just a moment and an acknowledgement of a fallen brother today as we all get together to keep it moving.
For sure.
Okay.
To kick things off, sorry, go ahead, Henry.
Sorry, Doug. I think I'm kicking this one off.
Go ahead.
To get into logistics, I wanted to start this off with a little video that helped me. It's a video of one of our touring mentors that helped me learn a lot about how to look at a tour.
Rules of the road. Hard-won lessons distilled into words, or hard-won knowledge distilled into simple single sentences. The performance is continuous 24 hours a day. At specified intervals, we let in the audience. That's about touring. And it means that somewhere 24 hours a day when you're on tour, a wheel is rolling, a roadie is working, somebody's in a hotel room writing a song, something is going on contributing to the eventual performance that occurs in those very rare moments in terms of the whole time fabric of the tour in which the audience is actually there and the lights are on.
Patrick.
Yeah, that one. I heard that, and it always stuck with me. So if you think about the performance working is happening 24 hours a day. As a tour manager, you need to understand that you're responsible for making sure that show keeps moving. And that art form of managing time and distance is logistics. Now, when it comes to logistics, it goes without saying that a tour manager's best friend is Google Maps. It should just be second nature to you to calculate distance between everything from hotel, venue, airport, Target, Chick-fil-A, whatever it is. You need to know how far these things are from you and how close, how long it'll take you to get there and how long it'll take something from there to get back to you is something that we deal with daily. So we're not going to spend an hour teaching you guys Google Maps, but maybe another session we could show you some tips and tricks. Our focus for this webinar is on the smaller acts and club tours and theater tours, and also for newbies that are just starting, but also for the up and coming acts and the tour managers that are finding themselves in the hot seat of a one bus, one truck tour for the first time. In this session, you're going to hear a lot of things that sound complicated, but if you're about to go on your first bus tour, you have to know the basics of this stuff. So when I started in van and trailer touring, we didn't have Google Maps or smartphones. For the first year or two, actually learned how to use an atlas Google that if you don't know what an atlas is. But
Page your legal pad. Yeah.
yeah.
Thomas Guide.
Always good.
Thomas
Oh my
Guide.
God. The
But when
Thomas guy.
When it came
The
time
pager.
for me to get my first bus and first truck, I made a lot of mistakes and wasted a lot of my time. I wasted a lot of John Aiken's times on emails. But because of people like John Aiken, Shannon, and Kyle Jones, they are the pros in your back pocket that will teach you how to do this stuff. And you just got to reach out to them. So let's take what we learned in building the tour, advancing, and budgeting, and help you prepare to manage your tour logistics.
Yeah, sorry, Henry. Yeah, I'll take over from there. And that's something that we really are going to keep stressing in these webinars, that this is not a linear process. We're going to circle back to previous webinars, previous subjects we've covered, because that's what you're going to be doing when you're preparing the tour. When you're going on tour, you're going to be, this is not an ABC, you know, you're going to be jumping all over the place as you're building a tour out, as you're planning for your first tour. So one thing I think it's really important to stress at this point is when you're planning your transportation for a tour, there are a myriad of factors that are going to come into your consideration of how you're going to travel. You know, do I have 12 people on my tour? Okay, well, I can't fit in a Sprinter van, so I need to look at alternate options. Do I have 13 people in my touring party? Okay, I can't use one bus because buses only hold 12 people in North America. So
not anymore.
Not anymore.
Okay.
And we're gonna right. And in a moment.
Touch on that.
In a moment.
For the most part, in North America, only hold 12 people, and you know, a lot of people will tell you you don't want any more than 10, 11 people on a bus anyway. However, you know, you can now, you know, now that Beat the Street is coming over to North America, you will have 14. Is that it? 14 capacity buses?
16.
16.
We've got 14 and 16 sleeper double deckers.
Yeah. So I think ultimately what we're saying is that a lot of this, when you're an experienced tour manager, comes as second nature. You're processing all this information without knowing it. You're aware of your crew size, you're aware of your approximate budget, and you're aware of your production size. So you might already know that you're looking at a one bus, one truck tour. But if you don't have the budget for a bus and a truck, you know, you're going to have to find a way to fit your production into a trailer, or find the extra, you know, be able to push your budget to be able to fit in a truck. That's something that will become a conflict at times if you're on a tour where the budget is tight and you're being pushed to fit everything into a bus and trailer. So it's important to consider all these variables before you lock anything in, because you turn up on day one to pick up all your gear with a trailer and you've got a semi's worth of gear. It's not going on the road, and you're going to spend a lot of money there trying to resolve that situation there and then. So as we've touched on all of these subjects, it's important to do your planning far in advance and be as prepared as you can be, because otherwise you're going to get into a situation where you're chasing your tail at the last minute. So the key factors that are going to influence what type of transportation you're using: budget, the size of your crew, the size of your production, and also the routing of your tour. Many routings in North America are really only doable by bus. You know, if you're at that point where you're potentially between a van and a bus tour, but you have shows that involve drives on show day of 10, 11, 12 hours, I mean, you're looking at a bus unless you want to be doing some extremely rough days. And I'm sure most of us have done those drives on show day, but that's something that you're going to have a discussion with if you want to be waking up at 5 a.m. to get from Denver to, you know, where Salt Lake on show day. that's a rough thing to do. You know that we've all done it and it sucks. So if you do that on your routing, and you need to be pushing to get that tour into a bus, really.
I was terrible at driving. I started in trailer tours, and the band actually voted about 3 weeks into my first tour never to have me drive again. So I was lucky.
I think it's important to say as well, I'm sure we'll get into this in a bit more detail, but what Henry mentioned using Google Maps, it's important to take what Google Maps tells you with a pinch of salt. Always add 10-15% onto the travel times that it's giving you, especially if you're in a bus, just for contingency. You know, you might, if you're driving Sprinter during the day, you're going to hit traffic. Across a month tour, you're going to hit a lot of traffic in various different cities. You know, if you're going into Seattle, anytime between 2:30 and 7 p.m., you're going to get stuck for a long time. So it's important to factor that into your drive times.
Yeah, Doug, a quick note on that too is that I use actually trucker apps for mileage when I'm finalizing a tour, because there's a lot of routes that Google Maps will do it that trucks can't or won't drive on.
Correct.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's important to double check your mileage and do that. Generally now that we get that information from the trucking and busing companies, but I always check. I can't remember which one I use. Truck drivers turn me on to it. I use a couple that I check and make sure that, because I've more than once have had a routing change by an hour or two because we can't take the route that Google Maps is giving us. So make sure you know, if you're going through mountains or you're going through states with mountains, make sure, or major cities, make sure you're looking at where exactly you're going, because you could screw yourself if you're just relying on one thing like that.
Be aware of the time of day too, because traffic, if you're going to hit traffic, you got to factor that in, or you're going to.
I think a big learning lesson is that you don't realize that it's routing a car.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
that's a big thing. Like underpasses that some vehicles can't go under and things like that. So it's important.
The miles per hour a bus driver usually goes? So they usually go under the speed limit, so we can have a smooth ride at night. It's usually about 60, 55, 60
I
miles
average
per hour.
60 for my own. Yeah.
So you got to divide the mileage by that to get a more accurate number.
Yeah, and in Europe, not to get into that, I usually do 30 to 40. So it's a vast difference. We'll talk about that in the future. But in Europe, you do things completely different.
And to be honest, when I'm doing an artist bus travel, I go under 60.
Yeah.
Depending on who that artist is, because I might average slower, because there are a lot of times where we ask those drivers to knock it back a little bit so it's smoother, so they can teeter along and go a little slower. And then we have drivers like Dwayne, who we call White Lightning, and we're like, we got to go, let's go. And that's generally a production bus that's going to sail on down the highway and let the driver take it as he'd like to.
That's an important conversation to have with your drivers. I think you want to stress, we don't have to get there. It's only a 3-hour drive. We don't, we don't need to be there at 4 in.the.morning. It doesn't do us any good. So go slow and give everybody a good night's sleep. And
there's going to be several different points inside the context of all the different points that the panelists are going to hit today. But in every single one of them, the most important point when it comes to having drivers is to talk to your drivers, because they know things that you don't know. They know about the real-time situations, whether it's going to be the drive, the roads, where we're parking, how we're going to get there, what the agriculture stops, what the general state of the road is. They're out there driving all the time. And as seasoned as we may be, we are not drivers, So if you wonder if your bus is going to fit under a bridge, and particularly now we're going to have to talk about that with the double deckers with Beat the Street coming in, and we'll talk about the merits of those buses too. And I know not everybody likes the large size bus, but when John comes
same height, the height is the same with the roof mount air conditioners that are on the single deckers. That puts the double decker and the single deckers at 13.3. So it's kind of a non-issue. But although that is pretty much the first thing that people ask about double decker, but the height is basically
That's
the
good to
same.
know out of the gate. Okay.
Just one other thing that you need to consider when you're looking at your transportation options for a tour is weather. If you're going out on tour in winter, which touring is seasonal, you will be, and if you're hitting anywhere in the north or Canada, you need to plan that. Snow, inclement weather is a big factor touring through the winter up here and in the north of the US as well. So that's something you need to factor in with your drive times. It's going to be slower in the winter.
And that's also a factor of why we always try to do traveling the night before. We don't travel day of. We try to get to the venue with enough time for trucks, buses, anything to get there, that we have enough time to always be ready for weather, always be ready for something to break down. We always want to have that fail safe involved in it in almost any situation. I mean, I know with jets and planes and A-list artists, we juggle that a little bit because we hope, planes are going to make it. There's always those records where an artist is saying, I'm going to travel day of, and there's nothing you can do. But for the most part, we always want to be traveling through the night to get there as soon as possible, so that we always have that bubble in case something does happen. You always got to be prepared for something to go wrong.
Yeah, and I think in the same vein, I think it's important that whenever possible, you encourage your buses to roll together. I know sometimes you have different schedules, band and crew, but the more the buses can roll together, it could save a show. You could save a show doing that.
Anyone that's worked with me knows that I'm kind of a stickler for that. The only time I might let the artist bus roll a little bit ahead, since that bus goes slower. If I'm holding maybe B party, and definitely C party's going to come up behind, we know we're coming down that road, but I don't like for anybody to be out there by themselves, and that sometimes, and that's another driver conversation, but sometimes you got that driver out there that wants to, be a lone driver, or again, sometimes you might have, if you don't reserve your buses early enough and you have 2 or 3 parties, you might have one company doing crew buses, one company doing band buses, and if there's an A party, there might be an artist bus from a different company. So you've got to really try to get your drivers together. I think it's a good segue over to talking, having Mark Clark talk a little bit about how we transport the human bodies on a tour, buses and vans and planes and trains and automobiles and buses and vans and sprinters and all of that. Over to you, Mark.
Well, depending on where you're starting, like let's just say you're doing obviously we can start with a support tour. I would say in that capacity, if you're not going to be included on any bus transportation, you're going to be starting out with like a 15-passenger van or a Mercedes Sprinter van, pulling your own trailer. Even some Mercedes-Benz Sprinter vans have cargo, so you don't even have to worry about hauling a trailer these days, and can move your people around. That's in one instance. Travel, like when you're starting off a tour, flying your team into the start point is always important. Figuring out where your vehicle's gonna be rented from, and if you need to have a driver that's gonna fly in a smaller case, that would be me. That would be a tour manager would fly in and pick the van up. I would fly my crew, everyone to the start point, and we drive. But also, if you have a rehearsal space and you have, like, let's say example, Nashville, there's a good starting spot. You have your rehearsal space there. Maybe you store your gear there. You can route around that and move. Whether that's buses is a good starting spot because you have all your bus companies that are located there. That's always a great starting point, but that's not always the case, So, sometimes you'd start out of LA or, any major hub that has tour buses is a good spot. But that's pretty much your basic kind of spread depending on how many people you have in the tour, like what Henry was saying, if you go over 13, but not now with the case of Beat the Street, 12 is kind of your max for a bus. So depending on how many people you have, if you're within a 12 range and you have that kind of budget and you're on that kind of budget tour, you can utilize a bus and trailer unless you have more production, and then you're looking at freight, which I think is Shannon's specialty and Kyle's that discuss moving way bigger production on that scale. But on a smaller scale, you could definitely get by with a 15 passenger role, tour manager, production manager, and your artist, 15 passenger van and trailer, following the buses as a support act, or just on your own tour in general. And then you as you move up the scale, you start looking at tour buses, so on and so forth, and flying your artist around. And if it's a fly tour, you could avoid buses altogether and just fly from date to date. You know, there was a tour I did where we never saw buses or vehicles. We literally just flew from city to city. We would do 6 shows a week and wake up early in the morning and go to the airport and fly to the next show on show day.
That's more common in your world, Mark, because you know, in the EDM DJ world, would you say because the tour party's smaller, you might be just 1 or 2 guys? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we would be able, we had the capacity to backline everything. So we didn't have to have that overhead with us. We could travel light. We had the artist, we had the tour manager, production manager, and the people that handled more of like the visual aspect of the show. I mean, we could keep our party to 5 people, and we just hit the airports every day and fly in, do sound check, make sure everything's up and running properly, and do our show day just like that, and then head back to the airport the next day. So, I mean, that's another instance, a good example as well, you know. So, but I guess it all is a genre by genre basis and how they like it done. But flying is a big one. Buses is a big one. You know, then you go into your smaller cat vehicles. And I would even like to throw out RVs was an option. I was driving bandwagons and RVs at one point and hauling our artists around in an RV.
Bandwagons have made a resurgence for the mid-levels.
It's knowing your tour, knowing your budget. You know, it's knowing your tour and knowing your budget and putting it together.
And I've flown a 3-party tour through Europe. Not a promotional tour either, a regular tour. I've done it. We've flown it. Not easy. Never easy to do that. And particularly, you know, when it comes to also having a bit of hand carriage gear that you try to, obviously you're not hauling drum kits around, but there's freight, there's, you know, racks and things and instruments, and it's problematic, but it can definitely be done. Also, just in the transporting of people, the other thing that we'll touch on really briefly is alternative ground support when you're on the ground in a city on show day, and the logistics of if you're not, you know, if you're coming out, if you're not traveling in on a bus, or if you are, maybe you're coming out of a hotel, what time does everybody need to be at the venue? And I'm going to touch on this right now, and it'll be broken down a bit more by John and Shannon and Kyle, but this is where we start to get into driver shift hours. Let's say you're coming out of a day off in the city, you're getting up in the morning, you definitely know that your crew buses are going to roll in the morning and they're going to go to the venue and the crew is going to load in. Now, let's say that you've got band and crew on the same bus, or let's just say that not everybody on bigger tours, the way this works is that you're going to have rigging, lights, and video are going to go in first in the morning. Those buses are going to go first. Not everybody on those buses may go. So how are you getting everybody else to the venue? Is it runners? Is it runner bands? Let's talk about your waves of crew coming in, and now you've got the first wave on buses, and then your second wave is possibly with runners. Now you got the third wave. That might be the B party. Well, that becomes an odd situation because you have to back up your driver's shifts from the time that you expect and want them to be able to leave the parking lot that night. You don't necessarily need your talent in the building until sound check. You definitely don't want them all up in everybody's face while load-in is happening. So you want them to come later. How is that going to happen? Is that going to come by ground? Are we using local ground transporters? The promoter providing that? Are we providing that? Is it a car service? Are you getting Ubers? Is it a runner? Are you tying up productions runners with band transport? Do you need, you know what I'm saying? So we're going to get into this specific discussion in a little bit of a macro manner down the line when we do day of show. We just wanted to put a placeholder here for everyone who's following along, that we're going to get back to that more in depth of how you move in people around day of show, because we want to leave more time for the actual logistics and talking about driver stuff. So we're going to hand this over to our great friend John Aiken, who was with Senators coaches for years and years. And now he is with Beat the Street, who are our excellent friends from Europe. Jorg is on the line, and he and his partner Ian over there do all manner of ground. And we were excited in January to learn that our good friend John Aiken, who had retired and left the business, came back to work with great friends of ours launching their business over here. And we couldn't think of a greater guy to talk about buses, particularly now when we have all these different rules and regulations to follow in terms of when we can actually move a coach and how long people can work for. So John was going to talk to people about what you need to look for when you're building a tour in terms of coaches and whatnot.
Well, I'd like to first thank my parole officer for allowing me to be here this morning with you all. And, let's see, where do you want me to start? Yeah, I think that probably the biggest issue, and I don't know if you wanted to save this till later, but the biggest problem is the band bus at the venue.
And you definitely, you wanted to start off, John, by explaining how early you want us to start calling around to reserve our coaches and what the drama is when we try to get a bus during high season.
Oh, okay. Well, everything's up in the air and upside down right now, but normally,
circumstances.
Yeah, normally, if you didn't have buses secured by now for the season, for the summer, you're SOL. There would be nothing left available right now, and the season has expanded over 10 years ago. It was very seasonal, and from say May through August was a season, and then it just started expanding on both ends, and then the last couple years the season has gone on into the end of December, where buses have stayed booked out, and pretty much the only slow period you could count on was January and February. So if you were looking for a bus deal, January and February. But we're going to be back to that soon, but right now everything's upside down. But so the sooner you call, the better. If it's best as soon as you have any idea that you're going out, even if you don't have a solid schedule and don't have dates, go ahead and call your vendors, call your bus company for sure. A lot of people, that's their first call, is securing buses. But you want to go ahead and alert the bus company that you'll be going out, even if you just know the time frame. Just give me some idea of when you might be going out, and then as you can, you get a schedule to me and you start to go over details. Let's see.
John, from that point, John, say I'm a new tour manager. I just got the dates. What should I do first? Should I hit you up first? Or
yes.
We in a previous lesson, we explained that it's good to go over the routing and the dates that you're given, and then do the mileage, take a look at where your days off are going to be, and try to plug in the off days. So because routing, every decision where we're going to move to on the days off affect everything, even on your budget. I think, like I was saying, I wasted a lot of your time so many years ago is because I would just send you the raw dates, and then I would go and pick my days off later, and then we would have to go back and forth, and it just changes the number around a lot, doesn't it?
Well, I think it depends on the time of year that you're going. If it's a time period when you don't think it's going to be that crazy, then you could relax on that a little bit. But if you're going out in season in the summer, I would make the call right away.
So what should a new tour manager do that just has his dates? When he hits you up and I've never booked a bus before, what's the first thing I should understand about when talking to you and getting into hiring a bus?
Well, that's something that's really important, that the sooner you get yourself in line for a bus, the better. The worst possible thing is to not be able to find equipment. So avoid that if you can at all. And then, you know, I'm gonna need to know, you know, how many people you're going to have on the bus, how many buses you're going to need.
Also bunk configuration, right? Like people need to realize that standard bus comes with 12 bunks, but they're like Legos. We can turn it into condo bunks, which are larger bunks, and it becomes 8. So we can go from 8 bunks, but then we've also done stuff where we ripped out a whole wall and just put desks over there, you know, and sort of customize it for the band and A party stuff. But I need to tell you, if I want just one section as condos, maybe that's the artist or the singer is going to go there, or you know, if it's one to all be 12, right? That's something I gotta alert you to before the bus heads out on the road.
I took out a section of condos and put a crib configuration in one of my A party buses.
Yeah, I've done the crib before.
Yeah, we've done that quite a bit. Yeah. That's pretty common.
Yeah. Baby on board.
But then, yeah, as soon as we get some kind of routing, then we can, you know, start talking about the cost, and you know, I'd get a quote back to you immediately, and
that's an all-in number, right? Tell me about what's all included in that.
Absolutely. Well, the all-in number includes, you know, the bus, the driver, fuel. Those are the big 3 costs. And then there are ancillary costs like DOT, covering the ELDs and all, keeping up with all the regulation. Then you've got your end-of-tour cleaning gets factored in, weekly cleanings. One thing that's not in that all-in number are driver hotel rooms. That's the tour handles the driver hotel rooms, and that's not calculated into the all-in rate on the bus. But you also have, we've got to pay for Wi-Fi and satellite. There's engine maintenance, but it's all in one number now. At Beat the Street, that's how we do it. Although most of the coach companies in the U.S. Break that all out, and we talked about it a little bit yesterday, but there's kind of some smoke and mirrors that goes along with that. You know, one bus company might charge you $200 for the end of tour, and you think, wow, I'm getting a really good deal here. Then you don't notice that they're charging you 95 cents a mile for fuel, and so the numbers, each company has a different formula, and it means you really got to pay attention because you're not comparing apples to apples, and it makes it really difficult. And anyway, that's one reason I'm really excited about how it's been simplified.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the all-in number. I'm a big fan of it, but you know what I'm not a fan of is the new DOT laws that we have to deal with. You have to have a rocket science degree to understand them, but I have let's go over these the bus log rules and DOT. I'm going to share this document that we made to try to simplify something, but this is what I spoke about earlier, that it can be a little confusing, but as a tour manager, you have to know the basics of this stuff. So all of these are on the website if you'd like to follow along. Can you kind of talk me through? This is, believe it or not, a simplified sort of understanding of driver time and how we manage DOT rules.
Very simplified.
I think the main point that I would make as we get into this is there are really 3 basics that if you understand the 3 basics, that's most of what you need to know, especially starting out. But that is that it's a maximum of 10 hours of driving. And that 10 hours of driving is has to fit within a 15-hour on-duty span. And I had someone explain it to me this way once, and it makes sense to me. But think of a person with a stopwatch. As soon as the driver does anything that puts him on duty, and that can be prepping the bus or doing pre-trip inspection, that stopwatch starts a 15-hour clock. And the 10 hours of driving doesn't have to be 10 hours straight through, but it has to fit within those 15 hours. And the driver can only drive again after a full 8-hour sleep break. And if you understand those three things,
and doesn't there need to be a 45-minute break inside that 10 hours?
No, that's trucks.
Only, okay.
Yeah, only trucks. So yeah, Kyle will need to speak to that because there are some differences, and actually I think the trucking side is a little more complicated than busing. We do also have the maximum 70 hours in an 8-day span, but that for real rarely comes up in our world. And the only has been maybe a handful of times that's been any kind of an issue for me. And usually that was because a driver would max out his 8 days by squeezing, if he was doing a deadhead, either out to the West Coast or back from the West Coast or up, to BC, he'd try and squeeze that in to, what should be a 5-day deadhead. He'd try and squeeze the mileage in by doing 10 hours on, 8 off, squeeze that into a tighter number of days, and he would max out his 70 hours. But it's whenever it's come up, it wasn't a tour issue. It had more to do with drivers mismanaging their hours, if that makes sense.
Hey, John, can you explain to everyone, especially since they're newer people, what a deadhead is?
Okay, deadhead, the way we calculate it, 500 miles is a day. And that's, and I don't know if that's universal, probably not, but for as long as I can remember, 500 miles has been a day.
Very close.
And one other issue that I think has pretty much gone away, but overdrives. For decades, overdrives were a thorn in everybody's saddle. Tour managers and accountants hated it, but what an overdrive was that after a driver drove 450 miles, if he drove 449, it wasn't an overdrive. If he drove 450, it was. And it seemed so arbitrary to tour managers and to drivers. It went both ways. No one liked the system, but a driver would get paid an extra day's pay if he crossed that line. And so it just caused animosity and conflict on the tour. And it kind of pitted drivers against the tour management, because drivers felt like, they would feel like, well, I drove 448 miles and you're not going to give me my overdrive. They felt like they were owed it if they even got close. And it went the other way too. Tour managers or production managers would say, you want me to pay you an extra day's pay when you drove 2 miles beyond the limit? It was just a really bad system. And we've pretty much, not many people are doing overdrives anymore on the busing side. But what we did was we prorated. The drivers have had a pay increase where the overdrives are prorated into their driver's pay, and they get more every day to encompass what they used to make in overdrives. We went back 7 years and prorated the number of overdrives and averaged it out with a big pool of drivers over a long period and came up with a figure. And it's now prorated into the driver
Hey, John, someone had a good question from Molly. Does the 15-hour stopwatch start when the driver is being transported from their hotel to the bus, or only once they reach the bus?
Once they reach the bus.
I think it's worth just stating that these regulations differ from the US to Canada to Europe. So when you go on a European tour, they're a variation on a theme. They're now brought into line, but in Europe you will have a different set of regulations. The drivers have to take 24-hour breaks at certain points and 45-hour breaks at certain points in the tour. So your bus cannot move for 45 hours. And it's important to work with your bus company in advance of the tour in Europe to make sure that you have those stop points and that you adhere to them. If you go changing your routing at the last minute, you're going to throw your whole tour out of whack, and you may need to fly in double drivers, which becomes expensive. We will maybe cover that in the international touring section a little bit more so that we can stay on track here. One quick question I just had for John is, are US bus companies and US drivers, do the DOT regs apply to them whilst they're traveling in Canada, or do the local Canadian regs cover them?
Most of the bus companies are staying with the US regs even when they're in Canada.
There is something to add to that and to what you're saying with regard to trucking. So there is the Canadian law, Doug, that I think that you were just referring to regarding the 24-hour break. So for every 14 days, there by Canada's laws with, their DOT laws. So that's something that when we're looking at tours from a trucking regard that we do look for. So we need to know that within that 14 days leading into going into Canada, that our trucks are able to designate a full 24-hour period of having a break. And if the schedule does not allow for that, then we do need to put a team out there to give the tour driver that 24-hour break. So while yes, the ELD regulations for the US, primarily take priority, we do have to be cognizant of how Canada's laws differ from the US and make sure that we are abiding by them as well. That's all I have to add on that part. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, John.
No, I think that's actually a really good segue for us to go into trucking, if you guys don't mind. Because we've got a lot to cover still. But Shannon, step one, tour manager, just got his dates.
Right.
How do I go about getting a truck?
Well, so the same as what John said. I mean, realistically, the earlier we have an idea, we try to project as far out as possible. In various capacities. I mean, we want to make sure that our driver hiring is keeping up to step with when we feel the touring season is really going to kick off, because it's different every year as to when the height of the season might come, and how many tours we have actually starting in early April versus those that are gonna start in, say, June. So we do want to make sure that our driver hiring, that our sorry.
Welcome to live video.
Live video. Okay.
So I still have to wait, and I only did my testing today because I accidentally deleted my.
I'm on a video.
Yeah, that's okay.
You just joined the ranks of the BBC reporter. Yay!
There's an agenda to be taken care of.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
This is what happens when education happens via Google Classroom and Zoom calls.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Anyway, I should have put my my mommy is off duty sign on the door. Anyway, so what I was just kind of going on is that we really do try to project for various things. We want to make sure we have enough resources. We want to make sure our driver hiring is on par. We want to make sure we're actually taking delivery of new tractors in, you know, the best time frame for us to be able to gear up. So as soon as anybody has an idea as to when your tour is going to go out, even if you're just like, hey, so-and-so is going out, it looks like it's probably going to start in May. You don't have to give me specifics until you know them, but the more information, you know, everything relies on communication in our business. So the more information you can give early on, the better for us being able to pencil in you onto our projections. And so that is first. And then of course, as soon as you have your routing, send it along. I mean, you know, I know a lot of people run miles ahead of time, but we can always run those miles as well and help in that respect. Our software obviously is geared toward what trucks can run, what roadways they can travel on, and so forth. So, you know, we can certainly help out in that respect. And then, you know, of course, I mean, I think in light of the ELD laws, I mean, there are, it's important to know, like, what time do you feel your trucks are going to be rolling out after the show? What time are you going to load in? Are you going to do, I mean, these are questions we would have asked anyway, but are a little bit more relevant now. Are you doing a load in day prior? Like, as much information that you can give as far as what your optimal times are. Close. Okay, no, go over here then. What your optimal times are and so forth. That's really helpful. And you know, like anything, if somebody's first starting out or somebody's a new tour manager or production manager, I mean, just say so. Ask every question you have. Like, again, communication is most important. Like, you know, we're always happy to, you know, explain how things go. Most companies are very similar to one another. We all might have our own little differences, but just talk to us, ask us. We're happy to explain it. And then I think Kyle, you were going to go into more of the nuts and bolts of the time. So if you want to jump in on that, please.
And I was just going to concur with you that we, for example, I think I spoke about this yesterday when we had the pre-meeting, is that we were already booked through August. And so her point of letting us know when you can, and even if it is just a time frame, you know, my tour, my young tour is going out. We need one semi, and we're going out for June through August. Let us know, you know, so we can start preparing. Just like she said, we're all geared up, as you know, we're having to divvy up toothpicks, as I call it, and we're laying the toothpicks out to make sure they all fit the tours on the calendar. So that's a good thing, is to keep us in the loop as much as you can, because we can be a great asset to you. And then all of a sudden you're panicking because you can't find a truck. And I hate to tell somebody no, not just for the financial aspect of it. I hate for them to have to, and sometimes I get them that have already been told no by Upstaging and Shannon and them, because they're overbooked, and they come to me and they get the same answer, and they get passed down till they finally end up with something that's not quite up to par. And that's the sadness of not being prepared. Any questions that y'all may have about driving times and stuff? Our driving times in the trucking side are almost identical to those. If we can get that put up on the screen, that would be great. But they're very similar. The day's just a little different. It's a 14-hour day, not a 15-hour shift, if you will. But it's the same basic crux of the matter is that the drivers can only be working for a 14-hour period. 11 of which can be driving. The rest of it can be prepping to go, loading, teching their truck, pre-tripping, whatever it may be. But that's the crux of the matter. If you will plan that in your routing, or your management and booking agents do that, we will all have a better day touring. It's the drives that get us over 550, 600 miles a day that are very, very problematic for all companies. And I don't care who they are. It's a problem. Right. He touched base earlier about how it was years ago with the overdrives and stuff. In a nutshell, an overdrive was a way to pay the guys to do things that weren't really on the up and up. And we're all now in a real litigious society, so we have to do things legally and things the way they're supposed to be, because we have, as a company, a special event transportation or a stage caller and upstaging, we all have employees and family members that depend on us to be running our companies without being shut down because we had litigation that was just too hard to bear. So we have to do things on the up and up. One of the things you need to know about touring is that these drivers now have to take a 30-minute break before an 8-hour period of work. They've got to take this break. So that has to be, Shannon can tell, that has to be figured into it when you're doing things now, because in ELD, there's no cheating. There's no around it.
We kind of look at it as like a 500-mile trip can utilize the whole 14-hour day for a driver. And if you do more 4 of those in a row, you're probably going to get into a team situation, even if it's on, a 200-mile drive, because you're
just because of the 70-hour,
you're going to start to get into that 70-hour rule. So, I think the other thing that I think is important for people to remember too is, like, if you look at it as an 8-day period, so you have day 1 and you have day 8, right? So tomorrow it's day 2 through day 9. It's constantly moving with you, that 8-day period. So, you just have to remember it's a sliding scale. So you have to look at any 8-day period. So that day 1 will drop off as you get to the next day. And now it's like day 2 through day 9. And then you get to the next day and that day 2 drops off. And now you look at day 3 through day 9. So, or day 3 through day 10 or 11 at that point. But 11.
And on day 11, your head explodes because it's
right. But
so
you just have to break it down into every 8-day period. So like, if you're looking at say a mileage schedule, I think everybody kind of, does similar things. But when you're looking at it, you just have to, if you just almost drew a line every 8 days and added up the miles that are within those 8 days, and then the next day your line goes one further down. So it's just a matter of adding it all up, which is why it can get confusing, because you're like, well, but I don't think I got over the mileage threshold. And it's like, well, that day dropped off and now this day's in there. So, it once you get accustomed to it, it's not an easy science, but once you get accustomed to it, it becomes more logically understood. But,
it's easier than Europe.
Yeah, but there's also, you have to keep in mind too, and this might be a good time to talk about drivers in this regard, but like, this system is new to everyone, including, drivers always had logs, but where and how this is once it's electronic versus a paper log, it's very different and much more exact. And there's a learning curve for everybody, particularly using technology. So, again, like communication with drivers, you do have to consider your load in time and your load out time as on duty hours for drivers. It might not be part of their 11 hours they can drive, but it is certainly hours that are on duty in that 14-hour day. So, those things, especially, once you bump into bigger tours where you have much longer periods of time loading in and so on and so forth, like, you do have to think about that. You pretty much alleviate a lot of the issue with driver hours when you have a load-in day prior to a show day. So that's something to be considered once your tours get a little bigger too, because they're able to reset. And then they do have to have a full 10-hour break.
On that 10-hour break, I want to interrupt. I apologize.
Go ahead. No, you take it over.
No, on the 10-hour break, one of the things that, and I'm, as Shannon knows, I'm friends with Upstaging's safety director too, Chip Waterfield. He's extremely knowledgeable because he's a former, 30-year driver. But one of the things that I pound my head against the wall on are these tours where, for some reason or another, the trucks are backed up to the dock at a shed, an amphitheater, and all of a sudden, here comes somebody banging on the driver's door 4 hours into his sleep saying, I need you to move the truck away from the dock. The new opening to put his artist bus right here. And folks, that can't be done any longer. It's not something, we'll figure it out. It can't be done, because once that tractor is started, that makes a note into the log. He's back on duty and he's broke the rules. Yep. And it puts a hickey against the driver's license, number one, and it also puts a mark on our score.
I think it's super important to say very clearly, the technology is now in the dashboard. There is no fudging laws. You turn it on, it knows you're there. That's it.
Yep.
Can't,
no more coloring books, as we used to call the paper.
Right, right. You can't just decide to write in whatever you want to write in now.
Parking is vital. You got to know exactly where things land and where things. There's no moving it once you. In Europe, again, even worse. But buses, trucks, when they park, they park. Drivers can't come back and move them. You got to be super organized. You got to be clear with the venues that I'm parking. I'm not moving. This is where we load out where we load it in, or where the bus is. We can't move it, and you got to be very clear on every step of that.
If you needed that Cadillac off the end of that truck, you needed that Cadillac. The only saving grace you might have is if somebody's got a bobtail or a 24-footer that they can go rescue your gear off of the back of your truck. But you also better be able to get in the truck too, because if your driver, it's just a myriad of problems. And before we move on, I just want to mention this to our newest tour managers, is that do yourself a favor and become very friendly. And we keep, we're going to give the same points of advice in the context of every single different lesson. Know your tour. And also, these drivers my lead drivers are my favorite people. I talk to them every day. Once I sit down and map out my tour, I spend time looking at what party's gonna stay in what place. Is the band gonna stay with the A party? Is everybody moving forward? Are we gonna spend the day off moving forward as we do? Is there a reason that the act might wanna remain behind in the city? Is that now a day drive? Is it a night before drive? Are we gonna leave at midnight the night of the day off to roll in the morning of? And this also, speaks to what's your hotel situation. Are you budgeted for a hotel every night? Do you need to be out of the hotels? And this speaks to some questions, and we'll get to those in just 1 second. But your drivers, so you want to send good information to guys like Kyle and to John and to Shannon. You want to know what you're doing. You want to know if there's going to be a later load in or a pre-rig, or you've got to be there the day before, or something's happening. Do the best you can to learn your routing, and then send it to the professionals. And then the professionals put their nuances on it, because they're going to tell you, listen, this road is shut down. We can't go here. We got to go another way. It's infinite. It's going to take a little longer because of some construction, or this bridge is out, or this is what we know. FYI, you're going to want to look at New Jersey. So my drivers are my closest friends. Never mind that I sit next to my driver in the jump seat every single night, and we talk about that stuff. We're going to get into, where are we, guys?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of segue onto that a little bit, Adrian, just to be thoughtful of the fact that, there's a lot of your crew that, you guys, the camaraderie is there all day. You guys are working together all the time. The drivers, be it bus drivers, which have a bit more interaction on the daily with the passengers on their bus, but truck drivers as well, a lot of their work is starting as yours is ending. So, those crossover points might be less, but to just really always be thinking of them when you're making plans. Like, for instance, where are your drivers parked? Do they have access to the venue? Do they have access to showers? Do they have access to catering? And perhaps, parking
bathrooms.
Bathrooms. Yeah. So parking off site, obviously that has implications with respect to ELDs, but it also has implications just with respect to, like, how are you getting them back to the venue? Are you putting that emphasis on them? Or, again, this is another line of communication with your lead driver of making sure that someone in production is coordinating with the driver as to when they're bringing drivers, say, that are parked remotely, back to the venue to have an opportunity to eat and shower, and making sure they're getting their sleep in. And, but that is part of the tour's responsibility to all of our drivers, is to treat them like the rest of the crew. And, on the largest tours, your trucks and buses and drivers in those regards could be some of your largest, departments. So, I think that just because, sometimes truck drivers and bus drivers like a little more like out of sight, out of mind. So the more they can be made to feel a larger part of consideration, both in your decision making, but just as well, like, you know, in bringing them into that camaraderie that you guys all have, because they are crew members and they sometimes don't always feel that way. But you know, I think that as you see, one thing that I love is that, you know, we have drivers that, so we had a driver a couple years ago who retired, and like it was planned, like the very first tour he ever drove on, he did the same exact artist, was his very last tour, and it was like 30 something or almost 40 years later. And I mean, it just really speaks to the longevity of our industry, which isn't going anywhere. I think we're going to come out of all this just fine eventually. But just, you know, the relationship, like the camaraderie that happens, like it is a big family. And, you know, we have drivers that are asked back on the same tour year after year after year after year. As I'm sure crew is put together that same way. And, you know, it is like a family. So I'm just going to be the mom for a minute, but just don't forget your drivers. You know, they have feelings just like everybody else. And, you know, they need to be taken care of as part of the crew.
I had a tour director on a stadium tour 20 years ago, and we had about 60 drivers on it. And he said, every time I turn around, they're driving from the farthest parking lot in the stadium on a golf buggy loaded with 5 drivers going to catering. They're always just going to catering. And I said, what do you think they have to do? They're there for us. When we needed stuff moved, they were there available. When they needed to drive all night long to get it, when they're available. So include them in your teams, folks. If you start your career as a young TM or PM or something, and you include everybody on your tour equally and treat them equally, I think you'll, at the end of your career, you'll look back and say that you did the right thing. Because everybody on this tour is important. I don't care what their position is.
Yeah, that's friends on tour are the drivers. The drivers are the key to that, especially my lead driver or my A-list, my A-party driver, and same thing goes with the trucks guys. I mean, I don't. My day doesn't happen without talking to them. I may not always talk to my production manager or my guitar tech. I always talk to my drivers.
And also the best thing as a touring guy for me, I toured for a long, long time, was when I woke up in the morning and opened that bus door and I stepped down off that step. If those trucks were sitting there, my day was halfway done. You know, I was so happy to see the trucks there. Yeah. Your drivers are this goes for all crew, just not just tour managers, but the drivers are on the front lines of the tour and are your first boots on the ground and eyes and ears to the venue before you get there. So I consider them like sergeants of the tour, really. Right. And they're keeping us safe while we're asleep at night. They because of them, the tour can move forward. But you know, I wanted to touch quickly before we go into Q&A. So say I've ran out of hours and I've now gotten to a team drive situation. John, can you tell us what team driving is and how we go about getting double drivers out on the road with us to work past the logs?
Well, and we calculate the team drives, and that's figured into your the all-in number, the quote. The team drivers are already in there. Although you do have some flexibility about if you can either fly in a team driver. If you have enough time, you can stop halfway or partway through the drive to give your driver an 8-hour sleep break. But if you don't have enough time, then you're going to need to bring in a team driver. If it's a 650-mile run and you've got 3 buses out there, you could probably get by with flying in one team driver and sharing him between the three buses. But anything over 10 hours, you're going to need a team driver, and that gets expensive. But typically, most team drives we've discovered end up being about a 3-day event. For the driver flies in the first day, gets into town, goes to the hotel, goes to sleep, comes in at loadout, and then they get into town the next day, and then he has to fly out the next morning. So typically it's a 3-day.
Right.
Rarely see them.
And I think that feeds back into why you want to have your routing in the hands of your bus and your trucking company and be as accurate as possible, as far in advance as possible. Because when you're budgeting, team drivers can get expensive. If you're in Europe and you have some crazy
Go ahead, Jim.
What did we have, 90 drivers and 30 trucks or something like that, like at one point in Europe?
Yeah, we were on a tour in Europe. Jim and I were working together at the time, and we walked into catering, and I said, who are all these people? Like, it's the drivers. We literally had double and triple drivers. It was almost to the point where there were so many, to be fair, we had exceedingly long drives between festivals.
And the best days off ever, but yeah.
Best days off ever, but the drivers there were so many drivers. We had 3 drivers per vehicle at the time, trucks and buses. There were we could have had 1 driver per person on the tour. With
many drivers as there were crew.
Well, and that's a good point, though, because, you know, the last several years, as I'm sure everyone is aware, there's been a massive driver shortage over here. And, you know, like, so another reason just why giving your trucking and your busing companies your routing early on is that, you know, in addition to resources as far as your tour drivers, we are also looking at teams. You know, we are looking at when teams overlap on different tours and how big each of those tours are, because, you know, while you might have a tour that's out that has 30 drivers, now you have to bring in teams, so you have 30 extra drivers. Well, as a trucking or a busing company, we have multiple tours out.
Right.
Yeah, so we have multiple tours out at the same time. And now if we are then, you know, we have a tour that has 20 something drivers. Now they have teams. What if we have another 30 truck tour that has teams? You know, you could have a need for 50 or 60 or 70 team drivers overlapping with one another. And, you know, that's a big resource suck as well. So it gets very difficult. We have, you know, as a company and as a department, we internally are very, very thoughtful. We have lots of tools that we use to really advance plan on overlaps and when multiple teams on tours are happening. It's really important that we look at the macro of our resources and not just the micro of any one tour. So that's really important for us for our projections and our planning.
Yeah, earlier, recently, 7 or 8 months ago, I brought 21 pilots from Mexico into the States in Laredo, and I flew down there, and we had 24 trucks, and we had 24 team drivers fly in and meet us there in Laredo, and they had 3 days to make it to Vancouver. And so it was you know, and Upstaging is great at doing the same thing. I mean, they've done it even on Taylor Swift a year ago. They had probably the king of all team moves I've ever heard about when y'all went from the West Coast back over to Denver or somewhere. It's just an astronomical amount of teamwork at your company anyway to put that together. It's not just Shannon putting that together. It's
God, no.
There were probably 100 people that touched it by counting the drivers and all. So it's a massive undertaking.
Yeah, I'm like the middle person. Like clearly the drivers accomplish it, but all of our guys in operations, you know, they are working so hard at all of the fine details, dispatching drivers. And again, that's why, you know, we might be really annoying. Like, do you have this information? Do you have this for me? Do you have that for me? It's like, we really have to arm our guys in operations with the information to dispatch drivers. And like, if we get that information at the last minute, then our dispatchers are getting it at the last minute. Our drivers are getting it at the last minute. And, you know, we really do. There's so much information coming into us in the height of a touring season from so many clients at one time. And it's like, you know, when it's very interesting, like you guys are working on every single part of one tour. We are working on one part of every tour. I mean, you know, not every one of them, but obviously on one part of multiple tours. So we just have so much information coming in. We have so many drivers that we're disseminating that information to on a daily basis. And, you know, for as well staffed as our dispatchers are, they're only as good at dispatching information as we are at giving it to them. So, you know, that's why if we're pains in the asses for information, that's why.
But the driver shortage is a reality.
Big.
It's a big deal, and driver wages have gone up. And you know, I've heard you know, some grumbling about how much drivers make now, but it's true for truck drivers and absolutely true for bus drivers. Just survive a tour with a grumpy old bus driver, and it can affect the mood of the whole tour. So
or they'll quit.
A driver that's not cooperative or not happy can bring down, you know, affect the whole tour. So yeah, treat your drivers good. And
you don't want the cheapest bus driver in the world. He wouldn't want to sleep on a bus. You know, that's like the old adage, somewhere in the world is the world's worst physician, and on Monday morning at 9 a.m. somebody has an appointment with him. You want to have great skilled drivers, whether it's in a bus or a truck. And in order for us to keep these drivers, and we're talking to a lot of younger TMs here, and I know this is further down the road for some of you, but maybe not some of you. I mean, I've seen people go from being a one van tour, then I look up and, you know, for example, our Luke Combs tour, my God, he was traveling around in a van, and now he's in 15 semis and selling out arenas 2 years later. So it happens. Yes. So but you have to pay attention as a young TM. You got to listen to these TMs and listen to your, like they said, listen to these truck drivers. They've done it, and they can help you. And don't feel like, well, you know, let the tail wag the dog. Let them teach you some things, and let the bus drivers teach you some things, and they'll make your life a lot easier. I promise you. I love to spread out the duties. It's not that because I'm lazy, you know, and so let somebody else help me do the work, because that's what we hire them for. We hire the set carps and the different people. You don't have to micromanage everything, folks.
Kyle, I think that's a really good, really well said, you know, and I think the takeaways I'm hearing from everything we're saying is over communicate. It's all about the out, and take care of your drivers. Yes. So let's move on to some questions. I've brought Ray Amico here with us. And Ray had a good question. Hey, buddy.
Greetings and salutations to everybody. How you doing?
Cool.
Hey guys.
Good.
So for the younger tour managers that are coming up and are starting out, and obviously you're doing everything, so you're driving a lot in vans with trailers, etc. You build up a skill level as a driver. And what I did back in the day when I started was I owned a trucking company, so I had a Class B CDL from way back. I went and got the P endorsement added onto my license when it was possible to do, so that for all these years I used to be able to relieve a bus driver or help move a bus, or in an emergency situation, which happened several times, I've had to relieve a bus driver that could not drive anymore. Let's put it that way. So John, my question is now actually in these new regulations and days, as a Class B CDL holder with EP endorsement and a valid med card, because I still to this day every year go get my med card renewed with all the expenses added on. Is that now something that the bus companies are actually looking at as a benefit to them of having a tour manager that can do all those things, or the new regulations so strangling that, you know, secondary drivers and etc. It's not really much of a benefit? What's your opinion?
Well, we didn't allow that because it becomes an issue for insurance. For one thing, you have to get them on the insurance, and that means you have to have a driver qualification file set up. The person has to be part of a random drug pool, and and we had just kind of a company policy that we didn't. We only used drivers that were part of our roster, but we did get approached about that a lot. I know a lot more of that goes on, I think, in the country world, and because circumstances are a little different there, but
yeah, I've been against it when it's come up. I mean, it's always nice in an emergency situation to move a bus or to say somebody can move the bus and they're legit. But I mean, if somebody's working all day, I don't want them driving the bus on top of that. I want a professional driver. I've had production managers or production guys that are like, I got my CDL and I get this, like, yeah, but that's not your job.
That's my reference.
Safety.
My reference is more to the situations like we were referring to of like now you can't even move a bus from a position and without kicking in someone's clock, etc. You know, those things used to be a lot more beneficial and helpful, and obviously with the new regulations, I personally would not work a 18-hour day as a tour manager, production manager, and then drive all day. Like that's insane. So no, I'm referring more to the emergency situations that we've all been in now, where a bus has to be moved 15 feet because of where it was placed, or just round robin and having to take care of things, and whether that's any help anymore. Because younger tour managers, of the skill sets that you're accruing in terms of what benefits you have as a tour manager, having office skills, et cetera, like that. Younger tour managers, you all tend to, driving tours with vans and a trailer on the back. You're parking at theaters or parking outside of clubs in situations. The levels of things are obviously different at each different level of touring. For the younger tour managers, I don't know if it's a benefit to them anymore to get things like additional certifications like a CDL or et cetera like that, or whether it's really not much of a help right now.
Well, I think only if they were interested in going into that for a career, because I think as far as the company is concerned, once you open that door, where do you draw the line? And we are approached about that a lot. I don't know, Kyle, I don't know if trucking, if it's as much an issue with but with your buses, have you been asked that question?
I was muted because I was coughing earlier. We get asked that a lot, and my whole response to that is they don't work for us. Just like you said, they have to be qualified, and that takes 24 to 48 hours in an emergency to get that done. You don't go take a pre-drug screen, urine test in the morning and have the answers that afternoon. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't. The whole process is longer than that. And also just pre-qualifying the person other than just the drug screen is a deal, and getting them approved by your insurance carrier and so forth. So yeah, but I have that question all the time. Hey, so-and-so, can he ride in your truck with him and he can help drive? No, he cannot. So
there you go.
All right. Thanks, Ray. Appreciate it.
Anytime. Thank you, Ray.
There's a question on the Q&A here that I'd love to take. It's something that we were hoping to cover as well. From an anonymous attendee, it says, if your bus breaks down in the middle of a tour, in the middle of nowhere, and it's something the driver can't fix, is that on you as a TM to remedy? Or does the driver/bus company have a support contact? This is a really important thing to address, because buses break down. They're on tour all year round. Buses break down. Even the best buses on the road break down. If you're a young TM, there's a good chance you might be out on an older bus or with a smaller fleet bus. So it's important, and I'll encompass other variables in this, such as weather. Snow can stop you in your tracks. I think when this goes down, it's important to react quickly and decisively. Yes, it is your responsibility as TM to get with the bus company and get, for example, if you're on your way to a show on show day, you've got to get there. You've got to try and do everything in your power to get your team to the show and get the show happen. The bus company is going to support you, but in the moment, you don't have a minute to waste. You might wake up at 5 a.m. or be woken up by your bus at 5 a.m. on the side of the road in Des Moines, Iowa, when you're supposed to be in Omaha, Nebraska, and the clock is ticking already. So it's important that you act decisively. You speak to your driver, get an appraisal of the situation from his side of things, and if it's appropriate, to speak to the bus company to see how quickly they can support you if the bus is not fixable within the 24-hour period. But ultimately, tour routings are so back to back to back to back, that if you miss one stop, you're going to be chasing your tail for a while. So it's important that you get on alternate modes of transport to get you to the show. If you, for example, if you have a separate bus and a truck, but your truck is at the venue already, you need to get onto local rental places to get your team to the next city and to load in. And then you can deal with getting the bus to catch up with you at a point where the show is happening. And in another situation, you know, for example, in January of this year, I was going from Vancouver to Calgary on a travel day through the Rockies. And that is in good conditions, that's a 13, 14-hour drive with no inclement weather. And we hit a snowstorm, and the local police closed the road from Golden, BC to Banff due to avalanche avalanche clearing. So we arrived in Golden at 2:05, and they closed the road at 2. They closed the road for 2 hours, but because of that, our driver was going to hit his maximum driving hours. So we just had to pull in at that point. I had to call the travel agent, cancel our rooms in Calgary, and we just had to hold tight in Golden because our driver was over his hours. We were on a travel day, and we pitched up at the hotel there. And sometimes you just have to hold your hands up with the weather conditions that are facing you and say, this is as far as we can go today. Legally, safely, this is as far as we can go. And, you know, we lost out on half of our hotels that night, but that was all we could do.
Real quick, something you just said real quick. We on a tour 10 years ago, we were up going from Vancouver over maybe 7,000 or 8,000 miles. And it was in the wintertime, a January country music tour. They're real prevalent up there in that time of year. And a snowstorm came. It was bad, you know, one of those epic storms. And most of our trucks and all but a couple of buses made it, but one of our drivers felt unsafe. And he was sliding and stuff. So he pulled over and stopped and said, I'm not going any further. Now, the only saving grace for the show, not because he had the consoles, so they weren't going to have a show, but the promoter ended up postponing the show because the fans couldn't get to the arena. But my point being is, I was trying to say is it's a safety concern, and we can't, when it comes to the driver, he is the final call. If he feels it's unsafe, we can't force him as a tour, as a company. We can't force them to drive in unsafe situations and conditions. And we kept getting, well, the other guys made it. Well, that was their call to drive at what they felt was safe. So we need always, with weather, we're at the mercy of the driver feeling it's safe or not.
Good point, Kyle.
Anytime there's a breakdown, though, it's all hands on deck. I mean, the bus companies it's a 24-hour service.
That's when you go with a big company that has backup for it. It's so important that you not go with somebody with one bus or doesn't have an affiliation with other companies, because you can get screwed so easily in that situation.
Shannon can answer this. I know how many times you've been called in the middle of the night saying, hey, do you have a truck anywhere near here? My bus and bus trailer are broken down and we can't get to the gig. And so, and I'm sure you've done it. I've done it a half a dozen times in 25 years where I went out and saved somebody, you know.
I mean, I think anybody who works for a transportation company, you know, over the years is going to get calls like that. I mean, in some respects, you know, I don't want to say trucking companies have more options. I mean, in any regard, there's, you know, when that kind of situation happens, you know, like John said, it's all hands on deck for those who are solving it. But, you know, we're carrying gear and, you know, maybe we have another tractor nearby, or maybe, you know, you call in like a critical to move the trailer. But when you're dealing with a busload of people, clearly, you know, that is a little bit of a situation, a different situation, moving the people instead of the gear. But, you know, it's just bound to happen anytime. And like Jim mentioned, you know, that is an advantage of using companies that have the infrastructure, that, you know, have the relationships as well, and the ability to problem solve quickly, because, you know, it's like when you buy insurance, you know, you don't buy insurance for every single day you drive, you buy insurance for the day you have an accident, right? And then how it happened, how it's handled in those moments are really, you know, kind of your indicator of the value there. So, you know, and that's one thing that, you know, clearly I'm fortunate to work for a company who's been here since it very much started. And our goal is always to, you know, get the gear to the show, always. So, you know, we'll pretty much do whatever needs to happen for that to occur. And, you know, it is worth noting too, I'm sure this happens with buses too, but, you know, the mechanics of all vehicles these days are electronic. So, you know, I mean, you know, all the clean burning, I mean, there's just so much electronics that go into motor vehicles these days, whether they're big tractor trailers or whether they're your personal vehicles. And, you know, it's not just as simple as being able to fix an engine anymore. You know, it's like the motherboard. It's crazy. But
we've got young gun tour manager here, Levi Wilcox, that has some good questions that some of this is going to be geared towards you, John. Hey, Levi.
Hey, guys. Thanks again for having me. John, thank you for coming out of retirement. I think that's pretty awesome, dude. Looking forward to having the buses here. So one of the questions I had, which I just realized I'm not even sure this would be legal for the drivers in the U.S., but similar to the buses in Europe where we have the drivers sleep on the bus, are these USA buses going to be having the driver beds in there?
No, the double deckers in the U.S. will operate just like any other entertainer coach in the U.S. The drivers will get a hotel room every day.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. So there'll just be some extra room on there then.
Well, you'll have 14 bunks or 16 bunks for
Gotcha.
the tour.
And then regarding like power, same way like you said, so I'm assuming we can still run the generator with the double decker here.
Yeah, they're equipped with a generator, which they don't have in Europe, but yeah, the setup's exactly the same. We've tried to copy or duplicate the double deckers in Europe as best we can, but there are some things about touring in the US.
Yeah.
And there are locations in the U.S. in the D.C. area and parts of California and things where you have to have shore power for a semi or we don't run our APUs on the trucks either in certain locations. So you have to keep, and as a young tour manager, you'll find that out. Talk to your drivers; they know.
More and more every day, more and more.
Yeah,
you know
yeah, that's an important distinction to make just quickly. If you're approaching your first bus tour, generally buses in the US have a generator that allow them to power the onboard functions of the bus without a connection to shore power. Shore power being the, you know, power run from a venue or a hotel or wherever it is to run the onboard functions of the bus whilst it's parked up. European buses do not have generators. So when you're routing a European tour, you have to factor that in so that, you know, you can't have a bus sitting in a parking lot with no power. It'll run the battery down and everything, you know, you will not be able to power the onboard functions of the bus. So that's a kind of an important distinction between, and that affects a lot of the routing of the tour. In the US, you can go on a day off if you're on your first bus and trailer tour, you can go and park in a hotel parking lot with a shower room and leave the generator on for the most part, for the moment. And you will be able to power the onboard functions of the bus. In Europe, you can't do that. So you got to route the tour differently, plan to make stops at venues that are coming up and get your bus onto power. And it also leads to more, at that level of touring, you're going to lean more towards hotels on days off, but we will cover that in the next week's session, I believe.
Levi, you had another question, right?
Two more quick one, guys. Thank you for your time. So for example, if you're going from, you know, a Kansas City, Missouri to Colorado, right? That's probably going to be an overdrive.
555 miles.
What was it?
555 miles.
No, he's got that down.
Knows it off the dome. That's amazing.
Say you have 3 buses, right? someone mentioned sharing a second driver. How exactly do you share a second driver, one among 3 buses, if you're going on the same the same street there?
Okay, well, that run, I don't think you would have to have a team driver.
No, you wouldn't. Yeah.
But you, the way you do that is they'd have to run together, because you have to stop to offload your team driver onto the other bus. And once that switch has been made, then the bus that the team driver started on can run its own schedule if it wants to. But again, it's always better to run together. But you just have to plan, divide it into thirds, and the team driver would hop off onto bus number 2, a third of the way through the trip, 2/3 of the way through the trip, he'd hop off on bus number 3 and drive it on.
It's about being organized and knowing and communication with everybody involved. You'd make a lot of things happen with just being organized about it and know what you're getting into.
That makes a lot more sense. All right, cool. Last one is regarding advancing semis arrival and departure at venues. Is that mostly on the PM, or do you guys usually like to do that as a team?
Shannon and I can answer real quick. I always work with the PM and our lead. If it's somebody that we've worked with before and they have a lead driver they like, I'll let the lead driver and the PM work that out. But typically we look for problematic areas when we see the routing. Other than that, I just work it out with the PM for arrival times. It's typically their call, as long as it fits in the legal parameters of our driving.
Right. Like when we get a schedule, if we notice there's going to be like a drive that can happen, but it has to load in at a certain time in order for it to be legal, like we'll let the PM know that, of course. And then just like, obviously first show, I always need to know, like, day one, what time do you want everybody there? But once the tour is out and they're in a groove, that's generally happening between the production manager and the lead driver, and then he's informing the team. But it tends to be pretty routine from show to show to show, with a few exceptions here and there.
Cool, awesome. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Levi.
Thanks, Levi.
Thank you.
Great. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah,
Mark, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah. I just want to thank everyone who came and joined in with us today to discuss logistics. Again, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. We have started a new Facebook page for tour management, which I'll share on the event pages, where I'll start building the event pages from. We'll start doing more interaction through our Instagram page, which I'll post on our event page as well for you guys to interact with us. And next week's webinar is travel and day of show. So we will look out for the event pages for that, and new special guests. And thank you to all of our panelists and everyone who's been involved with making this thing continue on and move forward. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Nice
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. All right.
Bye.
Bye.